Sometimes destiny does not knock on the front door. Sometimes it curls up on your bed and waits for you to wake up. Claire Bennett had heard old women in her hometown whisper words like that when she was a little girl, but she had never believed them. Life had taught her that miracles belonged in stories, not in the quiet corners of the real world where ordinary people worked long hours and hoped tomorrow might be a little kinder than today. When she accepted a position as a housemaid at Ashford Castle, the largest estate in the northern mountains, she expected nothing more than clean hallways, polished floors, and endless chores. The castle was famous across the state for its grand stone towers, its centuries of history, and its mysterious white wolf sanctuary hidden beyond the royal gardens. Visitors admired the beauty from outside, but only those who lived within its walls understood how carefully every tradition was protected. Claire arrived carrying a single suitcase, a worn notebook filled with recipes from her grandmother, and a quiet determination to build a better future. She kept to herself during her first week, greeting everyone with a warm smile while avoiding the endless rumors shared by the older servants. They often spoke about the Alpha King, Ethan Ashford, with equal parts admiration and respect. They also spoke about the 3 rare white wolf pups that lived inside the protected royal nursery. According to the staff, the pups were inseparable from one another, yet trusted almost no human being. Even the royal caretakers could only approach them after earning their confidence day after day. Claire never expected to see them. Her duties were limited to the guest wing on the eastern side of the castle, far from the royal nursery. After finishing a long day of work, she unpacked the last few belongings in her small bedroom beneath the eastern tower. The room was simple but comfortable, with a single bed, a wooden dresser, and a tall window overlooking rows of silver pine trees. A cool summer breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of fresh rain and wildflowers. Exhausted, Claire closed the curtains, whispered goodnight to no one in particular, and fell asleep almost immediately. When the first rays of morning sunlight slipped across the room, something felt strangely warm near her feet. Half awake, Claire smiled, thinking she had forgotten an extra blanket during the chilly night. She slowly opened her eyes, then froze in complete surprise. 3 tiny white wolf pups were sleeping peacefully across her bed, as though they had belonged there forever. One rested beside her pillow with its small head tucked against the blanket. Another had curled into a perfect circle near her knees. The smallest pup had stretched across the edge of the mattress with one tiny paw gently touching the sleeve of her sweater. Their snowy fur glowed softly beneath the morning light, making them look almost unreal. Claire sat perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest movement might frighten them. Instead of running away, the pup beside her pillow lifted its head, blinked slowly, and gave a tiny contented sigh before closing its eyes again. There was no fear in their expressions. There was only peace. Claire quietly reached for the bell rope beside her bed, but stopped before pulling it. Something inside her heart whispered that calling the guards too quickly would disturb a moment that felt impossible to explain. She simply watched them breathe, noticing how each pup seemed completely relaxed, as though they had searched for this exact place all night long. A few minutes later, hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway outside. Voices called to one another with growing concern as castle attendants searched every room. Claire gently opened her bedroom door, only to find 2 worried caretakers rushing toward her. Before either of them could speak, all 3 pups woke at once. They looked past the frightened caretakers, turned toward Claire, and instinctively pressed closer against her legs. The hallway fell silent. No one understood how the royal pups had escaped the secured nursery without leaving a trace. No one could explain why they had chosen the newest maid in the castle. And as Claire looked down in astonishment, the smallest pup carefully took the corner of her blanket between its tiny teeth and tugged once, as though asking her, without a single sound, not to leave. Claire barely had time to process what had happened before the 2 royal caretakers stepped into her room with expressions that shifted from relief to complete disbelief. Their eyes immediately locked on the 3 white wolf pups resting against her, as if they had known her for years. One caretaker slowly knelt and extended a gentle hand toward the smallest pup, speaking in a calm voice that had been carefully practiced since the day the litter was born. The tiny wolf looked up for only a second before turning away and pressing its side more firmly against Claire's leg. The second caretaker exchanged a puzzled glance with his companion. During the past several months, the pups had accepted only a handful of familiar people, and even then they never sought affection. They tolerated care because it was necessary, but they always returned to one another and kept a cautious distance from everyone else. Seeing them willingly surround a stranger made no sense at all. Claire quietly apologized, believing she had somehow broken an important castle rule. She explained that she had gone to bed alone and had awakened to find the pups sleeping beside her. Every word sounded unbelievable, even to her own ears. The caretakers searched the room for clues. The window remained closed from the inside after the cool night air had faded. The door still showed the wax seal placed there by the evening staff to confirm the guest wing had been secured overnight. There were no muddy paw prints, no scratched wood, and no signs that anyone or anything had entered during the night. It was as though the three little wolves had simply appeared beside Claire while she slept. Within minutes, the news quietly spread through the eastern wing. Servants paused their morning duties to whisper to one another. Some believed Claire possessed an unusual gift that animals could sense. Others insisted the pups must have escaped by accident and wandered until they found the warmest room in the castle. A few older employees lowered their voices and warned everyone not to speculate about creatures connected to the Ashford bloodline. They believed every unusual event carried meaning, even if that meaning remained hidden for years. Eventually, the caretakers convinced the pups to return to the royal nursery by carrying them one at a time. None of the little wolves struggled, yet each one looked back toward Claire before disappearing down the hallway. The smallest pup let out one soft whine that echoed through the quiet corridor and lingered in Claire's thoughts long after the room had become silent again. She tried to focus on her duties for the rest of the day, polishing windows, arranging fresh flowers, and preparing guest rooms for arriving visitors. Still, she could not stop replaying the morning in her mind. Every now and then she caught another servant studying her with quiet curiosity before quickly looking away. By sunset, the excitement had settled, and Claire convinced herself the strange encounter would probably never happen again. After dinner, she returned to her room, folded her uniform neatly across the chair, and smiled at how peaceful everything seemed once more. Outside, the castle grounds glowed beneath rows of warm lanterns while a gentle breeze rustled through the silver pines. Somewhere in the distance, wolves called softly across the hills, their voices blending with the quiet rhythm of the evening. Claire climbed into bed, whispered a simple prayer for a peaceful night, and drifted into sleep. Just before dawn, a familiar warmth brushed against her hand. She slowly opened her eyes, her heart skipping a beat before she even lifted her head. The three white wolf pups had returned. Once again they lay across her bed exactly as they had the night before, calmer than ever, as though this little room had become the only place where they truly felt at home. By the third morning, what had first seemed impossible had become impossible to ignore. Claire opened her eyes just as the first golden light filtered through the curtains, and all three white wolf pups were sleeping peacefully around her once again. One rested beside her shoulder, another had curled near her feet, and the smallest lay comfortably across the edge of the blanket with complete trust. Claire gently smiled, before quietly sitting up, careful not to disturb them. She still could not understand why they continued returning to her room, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. They never appeared frightened. They looked as though they had finally found the place they had been searching for. The peaceful moment lasted only a few minutes before hurried footsteps echoed through the eastern hallway again. This time nearly every caretaker assigned to the royal nursery arrived outside her door. Their expressions were no longer filled only with surprise. They carried growing concern. After confirming that all three pups were safe, the head caretaker politely asked Claire to accompany them to the nursery after breakfast. She agreed without hesitation, hoping that together they might discover an explanation. The royal nursery stood inside a beautifully restored stone building surrounded by ancient oak trees and carefully tended gardens. Bright morning sunlight poured through tall windows, filling the spacious rooms with warmth. Every corner had been designed to keep the young wolves comfortable and secure. Yet as Claire entered the nursery, something immediately caught her attention. The pups did not explore the familiar space. Instead, they stayed close beside her legs, occasionally looking up at her as though waiting for instructions. The caretakers tried everything they normally used to entertain the young wolves. They offered fresh toys carved from smooth wood. They prepared their favorite breakfast. They gently called each pup by the names they had been given after birth. The little wolves responded politely, eating well and playing for a short while, but every few moments they stopped whatever they were doing to search for Claire. If she walked across the room, 3 tiny white figures hurried after her. If she paused beside the window, they settled quietly at her feet. Several experienced caretakers watched the unusual behavior in complete silence. None of them had ever witnessed such immediate trust between the royal pups and someone they had only recently met. By late afternoon, word of the strange situation had reached the highest levels of the castle. The reports were delivered with careful accuracy because no one wanted to exaggerate events involving the royal sanctuary. When the final written report arrived at the private office of Alpha King Ethan Ashford, he read every line without changing his calm expression. Ethan was known throughout the kingdom for making decisions based on facts rather than rumors. He respected tradition, but he also believed every mystery deserved a logical explanation before becoming a legend. According to the report, the pups had somehow left their secured nursery for 3 consecutive nights without triggering a single alarm or leaving any trace behind. Each morning they had been found sleeping only beside the new maid named Claire Bennett. Ethan quietly placed the report on his desk and looked through the tall windows toward the distant sanctuary where the white wolf lived. After a long moment of thoughtful silence, he gave a simple instruction to his chief steward. No one was to interfere with the pups that evening. Claire would be moved to a different guest room on the western side of the castle without informing anyone else of the reason. Every entrance along the route would be carefully observed, but no guard would attempt to stop the pups if they appeared. Ethan wanted answers, not assumptions. As sunset painted the castle walls with warm shades of gold, Claire carried her small suitcase into the unfamiliar room exactly as requested. She believed the move was simply an administrative decision and thanked the steward politely before preparing for bed. Far across the castle, hidden from view behind a quiet balcony overlooking the moonlit courtyard, Ethan watched the western wing with patient eyes, determined to discover whether the impossible would happen for a 3rd night in a row. Claire fell asleep, believing the new room would finally end the strange mystery that had quietly spread through Ashford Castle. The western guest chamber was larger than her previous room, with tall windows overlooking the royal gardens instead of the silver pine forest. Everything inside felt unfamiliar, from the polished oak furniture to the pale blue curtains that gently swayed in the cool summer breeze. She smiled to herself, convinced that the 3 little wolves would never be able to find her here. After all, no one except the chief steward, a handful of trusted caretakers, and the Alpha King himself even knew she had been moved. Outside, the castle gradually settled into silence. Guards continued their evening rounds exactly as they always had, while hidden observers quietly watched every hallway leading toward the western wing. Ethan Ashford stood alone on the shadowed balcony overlooking the courtyard below. He wore a simple black coat rather than his formal royal attire, preferring not to draw attention to himself. His expression remained calm, but his mind carefully followed every possibility. If the pups stayed inside the nursery tonight, then perhaps the earlier events had been nothing more than extraordinary coincidence. If they somehow reached Claire again, then the explanation would lie far beyond ordinary instinct. Midnight arrived without incident. The castle remained peaceful. The chief steward quietly reported that all 3 pups were asleep inside the nursery. Ethan nodded once and continued waiting. Nearly an hour later, a soft knock sounded behind him. One of the trusted guards approached and spoke in a respectful whisper. The nursery attendants had looked away for only a brief moment while preparing fresh bedding. When they turned back, the 3 pups were gone. Every gate remained locked. Every window remained secured. None of the guards stationed outside had seen the little wolves leave the building. Ethan immediately made his way through the silent corridors, choosing hidden passageways known only to the royal family. He reached the western guest wing before anyone else and stood outside Claire's room. Everything appeared perfectly still. No footsteps echoed through the hallway. No doors had opened. The chief steward carefully unlocked the room without making a sound. Moonlight spilled gently across the wooden floor. Claire was still asleep beneath the soft blanket, completely unaware that several pairs of concerned eyes had entered the room. Ethan looked toward the bed, and for the first time since the strange reports had begun, he witnessed the impossible with his own eyes. The three white wolf pups were there once again. One slept peacefully beside Claire's pillow. Another rested comfortably across the blanket near her feet. The smallest had curled against her arm, breathing slowly as though it had found the safest place in the entire castle. Ethan quietly stepped closer, careful not to wake either Claire or the pups. He had raised wolves his entire life. He understood their instincts better than almost anyone alive. Wolves did not offer trust so completely without reason, especially not royal wolves whose bloodlines had been protected for generations. As if sensing his presence, the largest pup slowly opened its eyes. A heartbeat later, the other two did the same. Three tiny faces lifted together. Three pairs of brilliant icy blue eyes reflected the pale moonlight with an unmistakable glow. Ethan stopped where he stood. Every memory from his childhood rushed back at once. He had seen that exact color only once before. They were the same extraordinary eyes carried by the ancient white beast that guarded the Ashford bloodline. Eyes unlike those of any ordinary wolf. The room remained perfectly silent as the pups looked directly at him without fear. Then, almost together, they turned away from Ethan and gently leaned back against Claire, as if quietly reminding the Alpha King where they believed they truly belonged. For the first time in many years, Ethan found himself staring at a mystery that neither experience, tradition, nor reason could immediately explain. The sun had barely risen when Ethan Ashford quietly left the western guest wing, but the image of those three glowing icy blue eyes remained fixed in his mind. Throughout his life, he had studied every record preserved inside the royal archives, learning the history of the Ashford bloodline and the legends surrounding the ancient white beast that had guarded the family for generations. Never once had those remarkable eyes appeared in any ordinary wolf. They belonged only to the guardian whose loyalty had shaped the kingdom's oldest traditions. Yet the three tiny pups sleeping beside Claire had looked at him with that same unmistakable gaze before choosing to lean back against her instead. Ethan refused to draw conclusions without evidence. By sunrise, he had already ordered the castle library to prepare every historical record concerning royal wolf lineages, ancient markings, and unusual births connected to the sanctuary. The chief archivist unlocked shelves that had not been opened for decades, carefully placing weathered journals and handwritten family records across a long oak table. Ethan examined every page himself. Some documents described rare coat colors. Others recorded unusual instincts or remarkable intelligence among certain generations of wolves. A few mentioned the legendary guardian whose icy blue eyes had become a symbol of wisdom and protection. Yet nowhere did he find any account of three young pups carrying that same trait at the same time. By late morning, Ethan requested a private meeting with the senior veterinarians and the sanctuary caretakers. He asked precise questions instead of sharing his suspicions. Had the pups displayed unusual behavior before Claire arrived? Had they ever shown special interest in another caretaker? Had anyone noticed changes in their habits during the past several weeks? Every answer pointed in the same direction. Before Claire joined the castle staff, the pups had behaved like healthy young wolves. They played together, rested together, and cautiously accepted care from familiar attendants. Everything changed the morning Claire entered the castle. Since then they had searched for her constantly, ignored the comfort of the nursery, and returned to her room every night despite impossible obstacles. Meanwhile, Claire tried to continue her work as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She dusted shelves, prepared guest rooms, and arranged fresh flowers throughout the western wing, yet she noticed servants greeting her with growing curiosity. Some smiled warmly, while others watched from a distance, unsure whether they were witnessing coincidence or something far beyond ordinary understanding. Claire herself remained deeply confused. She had never owned a wolf, never studied their behavior, and certainly possessed no explanation for why the little animals trusted her so completely. During the afternoon, she visited the sanctuary at the invitation of the caretakers, hoping the pups might settle peacefully inside their familiar home. As soon as she stepped through the entrance, all three hurried toward her with cheerful excitement before calmly sitting beside her boots. Claire laughed softly and knelt to stroke their snowy fur. While gently scratching behind the ears of the largest pup, her fingers paused unexpectedly. Hidden beneath the thick white fur, just behind its left ear, was a tiny mark unlike anything she had ever seen. It was not a wound or a scar. It looked perfectly natural, almost as though the fur itself formed a delicate silver pattern resembling an ancient crest. Curious, Claire brushed the surrounding fur aside for a closer look. One of the older caretakers noticed her expression and walked over. The moment he saw the unusual marking, his face slowly lost its color. Without saying a word, he carefully compared the symbol to an embroidered emblem displayed on a ceremonial banner hanging near the sanctuary entrance. The shapes matched almost perfectly. Claire looked from the pup to the banner, unable to understand why everyone had suddenly fallen silent. The caretaker respectfully asked her not to mention the discovery to anyone until the Alpha King had seen it himself, because the symbol had not appeared anywhere inside the castle for many years, and according to the oldest royal records, it belonged to a chapter of Ashford history that had quietly disappeared long before Claire Bennet was ever born. The discovery of the tiny silver marking spread only among the few people Ethan Ashford trusted most, and every one of them understood the importance of keeping the matter completely private until the truth could be verified. Late that evening, Ethan personally examined the largest white wolf pup inside the sanctuary. With calm, practiced movements, he gently brushed aside the soft white fur behind its left ear. The delicate silver pattern was exactly as Claire had described. It was neither a stain nor an injury. The symbol appeared to be part of the pup itself, woven naturally into the color of its coat. Ethan stood in thoughtful silence for several moments before asking the chief archivist to bring him the oldest ceremonial records preserved beneath the castle chapel. Those documents had rarely been touched because they described traditions that had gradually faded into history. Hours later, surrounded by carefully preserved manuscripts, Ethan found an illustration that immediately caught his attention. It showed the same silver emblem embroidered on the collar of the first guardian wolf said to have protected the Ashford family centuries earlier. According to the handwritten notes beside the illustration, the mark was never created by human hands. It appeared naturally only in wolves connected to the oldest guardian bloodline. Ethan slowly closed the ancient book, but instead of feeling closer to an answer, he found himself facing an even greater mystery. If the symbol truly belonged to that forgotten bloodline, how had 3 young pups inherited it without anyone noticing? And why had they chosen Claire instead of remaining beside the sanctuary where they had been raised? While Ethan searched for answers, Claire finished another quiet day of work without realizing how much attention had quietly shifted toward her. She continued treating the pups exactly as she had from the beginning, never trying to command them or encourage their unusual attachment. Whenever she visited the sanctuary, she greeted them with the same gentle smile, spoke to them softly, and allowed them to approach at their own pace. The caretakers noticed that the pups seemed calmer than ever whenever Claire was nearby. Even their playful energy settled into peaceful contentment as soon as she entered the room. Near sunset, Claire decided to take a short walk through the castle gardens before returning indoors. The warm evening air carried the fragrance of blooming roses and fresh pine, while golden sunlight painted the stone paths with soft light. She paused beside a quiet fountain, enjoying the peaceful moment, unaware that someone else had begun watching from deep within the surrounding forest. Hidden beyond the sanctuary, the legendary white beast had remained unseen by nearly everyone for many months. The enormous white wolf rarely approached the castle itself, choosing instead to patrol the ancient woods that bordered the royal estate. Yet on this particular evening, the guardian lifted its head and became completely still. Its sharp amber eyes focused toward the western gardens where Claire stood beside the fountain. Without hesitation, the great wolf began walking. It crossed familiar forest trails, passed beneath towering oak trees, and quietly left the sanctuary boundaries without responding to the calls of the distant caretakers who noticed its unexpected departure. No one attempted to stop it because the white beast had never ignored its own instincts without reason. As darkness gently settled across the castle grounds, several guards spotted the magnificent animal approaching the western entrance. Instead of displaying the proud independence that had defined it for years, the guardian calmly walked through the open gates, crossed the moonlit courtyard, and continued directly toward the guest wing, where Claire's room overlooked the gardens. The astonished guard stepped aside as the great white wolf reached her door, lowered its powerful body onto the stone floor, rested its head across its front paws, and quietly closed its eyes, as though it had finally arrived exactly where it had intended to be all along. When Claire opened her bedroom door the following morning, she stopped so suddenly that she almost forgot to breathe. Resting peacefully on the stone floor outside her room was the legendary white beast. The enormous wolf slowly lifted its head at the sound of the door, its amber eyes calm and steady as they met hers. Instead of standing immediately, the guardian simply watched her for a quiet moment before giving a slow blink that carried neither warning nor fear. Claire had heard countless stories about the majestic wolf that protected the Ashford bloodline, yet standing only a few feet away from the living guardian felt entirely different. There was immense strength in its broad shoulders and powerful frame, but there was also an unmistakable sense of peace. Claire instinctively lowered her gaze in respect rather than stepping forward. She had no desire to disturb such a magnificent creature. Behind her, the three white wolf pups hurried out of the room and immediately gathered around the guardian. They wagged their tails happily before turning back toward Claire as though inviting her to join them. Several guards and caretakers who had quietly assembled at the far end of the hallway stared in complete disbelief. Throughout many years, the white beast had accepted only Ethan Ashford as someone worthy of standing close without hesitation. Even experienced sanctuary caretakers always allowed the guardian to decide the distance between them. Yet now the great wolf remained calmly beside Claire's door as though it had chosen to stand watch through the entire night. Moments later, Ethan arrived after receiving an urgent message from the Western Wing. He expected to find confusion. Instead, he found perfect stillness. The white beast remained lying across the entrance, the three pups resting nearby, and Claire standing quietly with the respectful patience she had shown from the beginning. Ethan carefully approached the guardian. The great wolf acknowledged him with a gentle glance before returning its attention to Claire. Ethan had known the guardian since childhood and understood every subtle movement it made. This was not ordinary curiosity. It was recognition. Without speaking, Ethan gave a small signal to the surrounding staff, asking everyone to remain perfectly still. He wanted to observe what the guardian would do next without interference. Claire noticed that one of the pups had wandered a few feet away and was struggling to reach a small wooden step leading toward the garden path. Smiling softly, she bent down and gently lifted the tiny wolf into her arms before setting it safely back beside its siblings. At that exact moment, something extraordinary happened. The white beast slowly rose to its feet, took 3 measured steps toward Claire, then lowered its great head in front of her. It was not a gesture of weakness. It was a gesture of complete trust, one that had not been witnessed within the castle walls for generations. Every person standing in the hallway instinctively fell silent. Ethan himself remained motionless, unable to deny what he had just seen. The guardian had not bowed to a command. It had offered its respect freely. Claire, unaware of the significance of the moment, simply smiled with quiet kindness. She slowly extended one hand, allowing the guardian to decide whether any closer contact was welcome. The white beast gently leaned forward until its forehead rested beneath her fingertips for a brief, peaceful moment before stepping back with calm dignity. Ethan realized that no training, no instinct, and no ordinary explanation could account for what had unfolded before his eyes. Later that afternoon, while reviewing additional records in the oldest section of the Royal Archives, the chief archivist discovered an overlooked map hidden inside the cover of a weathered journal. The faded parchment marked a forgotten chamber beneath Ashford Castle, sealed decades earlier and connected by an underground passage that no longer appeared on any modern blueprint. In the corner of the map, beside the same ancient silver emblem Claire had found behind the largest pup's ear, someone had written a single sentence in careful handwriting. It read, "When the guardian chooses again, the forgotten truth will awaken beneath the castle." The discovery of the forgotten map changed the quiet rhythm of Ashford Castle almost overnight. Ethan Ashford gathered only the few people he trusted without question, including the chief archivist, the head caretaker, and Claire Bennett. He chose not to involve the Royal Council because he knew that unfinished answers often created unnecessary fear. Before sunrise, the small group followed the fated directions through an abandoned corridor hidden behind the oldest chapel. Thick stone walls surrounded a narrow passage that had remained untouched for generations. The air carried the scent of aged cedar and cool earth, while small lanterns cast gentle pools of golden light across the worn floor. Claire walked carefully behind Ethan, unsure why she had been invited. Yet the three white wolf pups stayed close to her heels as though they already knew where they were going. The legendary white beast followed several steps behind, silent and watchful. After nearly 10 minutes, the passage opened into a circular chamber unlike anything Claire had ever seen. The room was simple rather than grand, yet every stone seemed carefully placed with purpose. Ancient carvings of wolves surrounded the walls, each one protecting families instead of standing beside kings. At the center of the chamber rested a polished stone pedestal bearing the same silver emblem that had appeared behind the largest pup's ear. Dust covered almost everything except the pedestal itself, which looked strangely untouched despite the passing years. Claire stepped closer without thinking. The three pups immediately gathered around the base of the stone, sitting quietly as though they had returned to a place they somehow remembered. The white beast approached next and calmly lowered its head before the pedestal, repeating the same gesture of trust it had shown Claire outside her room. The chief archivist slowly opened another fragile journal recovered from the hidden shelves beneath the chapel. As he carefully compared the carvings to the handwritten notes, his voice trembled with quiet amazement. The chamber had never been built to celebrate royal power. According to the oldest records, it honored a sacred promise made centuries earlier between the Ashford family and the guardian wolves. The agreement declared that no ruler could truly protect the kingdom alone. Whenever the guardian bloodline sensed extraordinary compassion rather than ambition, it would choose a human heart worthy of its complete trust. Ethan listened without interrupting. For the first time, every strange event during the past week began fitting together with remarkable clarity. The pups had not searched for Claire because she possessed hidden royal blood or mysterious powers. They had chosen her because of the kindness she offered without expecting anything in return. She had never tried to earn their loyalty. She had simply treated them with patience, respect, and gentle care. Claire quietly shook her head, insisting she had done nothing special. She explained that every living creature deserved kindness, whether it belonged to a castle or a small farm. Her simple answer filled the silent chamber more deeply than any speech. The chief archivist smiled softly before reading the final paragraph preserved at the bottom of the ancient page. It explained that the guardian wolves would always recognize compassion long before people learned to see it themselves. The three pups slowly walked toward Claire again and sat beside her in perfect unison. At that same moment, a thin beam of morning sunlight slipped through a narrow opening high above the chamber, illuminating the silver emblem on the pedestal. The carved symbol reflected softly across the polished floor before settling upon the three pups and the white beast together. Ethan watched the quiet scene in thoughtful silence, finally understanding that the greatest inheritance protected by the Ashford family had never been a throne, a title, or a fortress. It had always been the bond of trust freely given between hearts that chose kindness first. Yet as everyone prepared to leave the hidden chamber, the smallest pup suddenly paused beside an old stone wall and gently tapped it twice with one tiny paw, revealing the faint outline of another sealed doorway that none of the ancient maps had ever mentioned. The faint outline of the hidden doorway drew every eye inside the ancient chamber. Ethan Ashford carefully brushed away centuries of dust until a narrow stone panel became visible beneath the carved wall. There were no locks, no handles, and no symbols except the same silver emblem that had appeared behind the largest pup's ear. Before anyone could suggest a solution, the three white wolf pups quietly walked forward together. They sat side by side facing the hidden entrance while the legendary white beast approached behind them with calm confidence. The great guardian gently rested one massive paw upon the stone floor directly beneath the emblem. A soft sound echoed through the chamber as the ancient mechanism slowly awakened. The sealed doorway moved only a few inches before stopping, revealing a small room preserved almost exactly as it had been many generations earlier. Unlike the grand halls of the castle above, this quiet place contained only a simple wooden table several carefully protected journals, and a beautifully carved cradle made from pale oak. Claire stepped forward with respectful curiosity, while Ethan carefully opened the oldest journal resting at the center of the table. The first page carried the familiar silver emblem and a handwritten message addressed not to any king, but to every future guardian of Ashford Castle. It explained that the greatest responsibility of the royal family had never been to rule over wolves. Instead, they had been entrusted with protecting the rare bond that could exist only when kindness was freely offered without expecting loyalty in return. The guardian wolves would always recognize such a heart before the world did. Their choice could never be commanded, purchased, or inherited. It had to be earned through compassion shown in ordinary moments when no reward was expected. Ethan slowly turned each fragile page, discovering records left behind by generations who had quietly honored that promise. Every few decades, the guardian wolves had chosen one humble individual whose gentle spirit reminded the kingdom that true leadership began with kindness rather than authority. None of those people had worn crowns. Some had been healers, teachers, gardeners, or caretakers. Their names had never become famous, yet their influence had quietly shaped the future of the Ashford family. Claire listened in complete silence, feeling overwhelmed by the realization that the Pups had never been asking her to become someone extraordinary. They had simply responded to the person she had always tried to be. Ethan closed the journal and smiled for the first time since the mystery had begun. He thanked Claire not because she had solved an ancient secret, but because she had reminded everyone inside the castle of something they had gradually forgotten. Titles earned respect, but compassion earned trust. That afternoon, Ethan announced only one simple change throughout Ashford Castle. Claire would become the official caretaker responsible for the royal sanctuary, not because of privilege, but because the guardian wolves had already placed their confidence in her. No elaborate ceremony followed. No grand celebration filled the castle halls. Instead, life quietly continued with a renewed sense of purpose. Visitors soon noticed that the once cautious white wolf pups had grown into healthy young guardians whose calm nature reflected the kindness surrounding them. The legendary white beast resumed watching over the forests each evening, yet every night before disappearing into the trees, it paused outside Claire's window for a quiet moment, as though checking that everything remained peaceful. Ethan often visited the sanctuary, no longer searching for impossible explanations, but appreciating the quiet lessons unfolding before him. And as seasons gently changed, one tradition never disappeared. Every evening, after the castle lights dimmed and silence settled across the halls, the three white wolf pups found their way to Claire's room, climbed onto the familiar bed where the mystery had first begun, and peacefully fell asleep beside the woman they had chosen long before anyone else understood why.